10 nautical miles north of Helgoland, the North Sea is flat and gray and 16 degrees. It is early afternoon on Monday, the 18th of July, 1966. 2/8 cloud. 20 miles of visibility. It is a beautiful day to fly. A Sabre is towing a flag target above the water. Behind it, an F-104 Starfighter of Jagdgeschwader 71, the Richthofen wing, rolls in for a gunnery pass. The pilot is Oberleutnant Siegfried Arndt. He has been with the squadron about 4 weeks. The nose comes up, then it keeps coming up, past the angle where this particular aircraft stops flying and starts falling. At 1318 Zulu, Arndt fires his ejection seat somewhere between 15 and 17,000 feet. 1 minute later, the Starfighter goes into the sea, 2 nautical miles from a German destroyer, and burning fuel spreads out across the surface. The range control tape at Westerland catches the call in 2 languages at once. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Mission 13. B is bailing out, I think. And here is the part that matters. He got out. His wingman circles above him and later tells a parliamentary inquiry that Arndt moved his arms and his legs a great deal, pulled his legs right up, and put his hands over his head. You could call it making himself understood. For 11 minutes, Siegfried Arndt is a living man under a white parachute above a calm sea 2 miles from a warship that is already turning at full speed. He inflates his life collar by hand. He pulls the dinghy release. He unclips his chin strap. He unclips one side of his oxygen mask. 5 deliberate acts of a conscious man. At 13:29, he enters the water at about 6 meters a second and goes under by 2. The impact tears the inflated collar loose, and his head slips out through it. He cannot open the parachute release. The wind is 16 knots. The canopy stays full, and it drags him. He drowns at about 20 minutes to 2. His body comes ashore 27 days later against a stone mole at Langness. The German parliament held a formal inquiry into that one death. Its finding, published on the 16th of February 1967, states that the conditions for rescuing the ejected pilot were as favorable as could possibly be imagined. Calm sea, clear sky, a destroyer 2 miles off. And he died anyway. Siegfried Arndt was one of 116. The German press gave the aircraft a name for it, Widowmaker, the Widowmaker. The world has believed that name for 60 years, except that somewhere else, in exactly the same years, 21 of these aircraft flew for 7 years and killed nobody at all. So if the machine did it, why did it only do it here? Torrejon, outside Madrid, January 1965. The Spanish Air Force is taking delivery of 21 Starfighters, 18 single-seaters, 3 two-seat trainers. The first of them come ashore at Rota on the 15th of January. They go to one wing at one base in dry air and Mediterranean light. Spain flew them until 1972, 7 years, roughly 17,000 flight hours. And in those 7 years, the Spanish Air Force lost no aircraft and buried no pilots. Not one. Spain is the only starfighter operator on Earth with a perfect record. You will hear people say Spain flew it for 17 years without a scratch. They did not. It was 7 years and about 17,000 hours, and somewhere in the retelling, the hours turned into years. 7 is the number, and 7 is the stranger number, because in those same 7 years, West Germany was burying men at a rate of more than 1 a month. What did Spain do with the aircraft? Fair weather, high altitude, daylight interception. That is the whole list. Never at low level in bad weather. Never all weather. Never nuclear. Remember that? It is the first clue, and we are going to walk straight past it for now. Because if your explanation is that Spain simply got the good ones, there is a serial number that ends that argument. In 1972, Spain replaced its Starfighters with Phantoms, and it did not scrap the old jets. It split them between Greece and Turkey. Not the same type of aircraft, the same airframes, the same serial numbers, machines that had never had an accident in their lives. And in Greek and Turkish hands, they went straight into the loss statistics like everybody else's. One of them was an F-104G, serial 63-13643. Built by Canadair, arrived in Spain in June 1965, retired on the 31st of May, 1972, with 676 hours on the airframe and not a mark on it. 2 weeks later, it was Greek. Nothing about that aircraft ever changed except the flag painted on the fin. Remember its number. We will come back to it. Now, at this point, most people reach for the obvious answer. Germany was bribed into buying a bad aircraft, and German pilots paid the bill. Hold that thought because we are going to spend a whole chapter on the money, and there is more of it than you think. But take one number with you first. The worst Starfighter record in the world does not belong to West Germany. It belongs to Canada. Around 110 major accidents across 25 years. 37 pilots killed out of 238 aircraft. And nobody bribed Canada. Canada built its own, under license, at home. Meanwhile, the one country where a Lockheed bribe for this aircraft is genuinely documented, the Netherlands, came out better than Canada did. Corruption decided which aircraft several countries bought. It did not decide how many of their pilots died in it. So the machine is a constant and the money does not correlate, which means the thing we are looking for is not something a factory built. It is something a country did. It took the German parliament 2 years, a commission of inquiry, and one dead lieutenant in the North Sea to find it. And when they found it, they wrote it down. That document still exists. Hold that too. Now meet the accused. Korea, 1951. Lockheed's chief engineer, Clarence Johnson, the man they called Kelly, goes out to talk to fighter pilots at war and asks them what they want next. They tell him fighters have become too heavy and too complicated. The MiG they are fighting climbs better mostly because it weighs less. Johnson goes home and designs the smallest airframe he can wrap around the biggest engine in America. What came back was barely a wing at all. The span is 21 feet 11 inches, about 7.5 feet of wing on each side of the fuselage. At the root, the wing is 4.2 inches thick. The leading edge is machined to a radius of 0.4 of a millimeter, sharper than most kitchen knives, sitting at about head height when the aircraft is parked. So when it is parked, padded covers go on the wing. Not to protect the wing, to protect the men walking under it. And in Lockheed's own sales literature, that same murderous edge is a selling point, because an edge that thin gives ice nothing to hold on to. Brochure and hazard warning in the same sentence. That is this aircraft in one image, and it is worth remembering when the arguing starts. In May 1958, it owned the sky. On the 7th, Major Howard Johnson took one to Mach 2.23, hauled it into a 52-degree climb, lost his afterburner at 67,000 feet, and kept going upward on momentum alone to just over 91,000 feet, with a dead engine high enough to see the curve of the Earth. 9 days later, Captain Walter Irwin averaged just over 1,404 miles an hour at 40,000 feet, and afterwards complained that at 60 below zero, even that temperature was too warm. For the first time in history, one aircraft type held the absolute speed record and the absolute altitude record at the same moment. And in that same spring, the United States Air Force grounded every one of them fitted with the early engine. The Air Force's own diagnosis, printed at the time, was pure engine trouble. The fastest and highest flying fighter in the world was sitting on the ramp in the same weeks it was setting 2 world records, which brings us to a number almost nobody knows. America bought 277 production Starfighters, out of roughly 2,580 built worldwide. 11%. Air Defense Command took it only as a stopgap while a better interceptor ran late, because it had no all-weather capability and could not plug into the Continental Air Defense Network the whole system was built around. By the end of 1960, they had traded them away. So the country that invented it took 11% and got rid of it in under 3 years, which raises the obvious question. Who took the rest? One country bought 916, more than 3 times what the United States Air Force ever owned. And at the end of 1958, in the capital of that country, a hotel was filling up with American salesmen. Bonn, late 1958. The Grand Hotel is so thick with Lockheed sales staff and lobbyists that German journalists rename it the Lockheedhof. Franz Josef Strauss, the defense minister, is reported to have said that the salesmen were everywhere and that he could not open a drawer in his desk without a Lockheed man falling out of it. That line comes down to us secondhand, so take it as reported rather than sworn. But nobody in Bonn disputed the atmosphere. The competition, in truth, lost before it started. Britain never actually offered the Lightning. It pitched an aircraft that existed as a mock-up on the Isle of Wight while the Starfighter was already coming off a production line, and its representative drove around Bonn in a Rolls-Royce issuing stately pronouncements, striking reporters as not so much a salesman as the ambassador from Derby. The real short list came down to the American aircraft, the French Mirage, and a Grumman. And here is the thing the myth gets wrong. The men who chose it were not fools, and they were not forced. Walter Krupinski, a wartime ace with 197 victories, flew the American candidates in California and evaluated the Mirage in France, and he recommended the Starfighter. On the 6th of November 1958, the Parliamentary Defense Committee approved the purchase with a single abstention and with opposition votes in favor. Germany chose this aircraft with its eyes open, on the merits, in public. Then two things happened to it that nobody voted on. First, in 1960, before the German version had even finished testing, the order was expanded from 250 aircraft to 700. It finished at 916 in German service. Germany was now buying roughly 1 out of every 3 Starfighters ever built. Second, and this is the one that kills people, the mission was changed out from under the design. Kelly Johnson had drawn a light, clear-weather day fighter for chasing other fighters in daylight at altitude. West Germany bought it as an all-weather, multi-role, low-level nuclear strike aircraft. Up to 250 Luftwaffe starfighters were committed to NATO's nuclear forces. Each fighter bomber wing kept 6 of them on 24-hour alert, fueled, ready to be airborne within 17 minutes of the order, with a 1-megaton bomb on the center line, under American guard, releasable only by the President of the United States. Spain's starfighters, remember, spent 7 years never going low in bad weather at all. If you like stories where the official version turns out to be the wrong one, that is what this channel does. Subscribe and stay with me, because the next part is where the money finally shows up. There was a bribe, it is proven, it is documented, and it is not German, it is Dutch. Prince Bernhard, husband of the Queen of the Netherlands and Inspector General of the Dutch Armed Forces, took about $1 million from Lockheed in 5 installments between 1960 and 1962 around the Dutch decision to buy this aircraft. A Dutch commission of inquiry reported in 1976 that there was no proof he ever pocketed the money personally, but that he had shown himself open to dishonorable requests and offers and had damaged the interests of the state. He was never prosecuted. He lost his post, his company boards, and the right to wear his uniform in public. He admitted taking the money in an interview published 2 weeks after his death in 2004. The German allegation is louder, and it cannot be settled. A former Lockheed lobbyist named Ernest Hauser, a personal friend of Strauss since the occupation years, told United States Senate investigators that Strauss and his party had taken at least $10 million. Strauss denied it and sued for slander. The allegation was never corroborated. A parliamentary committee of inquiry sat for 16 months and could not establish bribery. And then there is the detail that closes the door forever. Most of the Defense Ministry's Lockheed files had been destroyed in 1962, 14 years before anybody came looking for them. But do not let that swing you the other way, because bribery in this program was proven, just lower down. German investigators documented something like 1.1 to 1.3 million marks in Lockheed money, a considerable share of it going to the head of the Air Force Equipment Division at the Federal Procurement Office. So the honest sentence is not that nobody was bribed. The honest sentence is that bribery happened, and it was never proven against the minister. And through all of it, one man was saying out loud that this was going to kill people. Erich Hartmann. 352 victories. The highest scoring fighter pilot in the history of aviation, and by then a serving officer in the new German Air Force. He opposed the purchase. He told the Luftwaffe's inspector in 1957 to buy a small number first, evaluate them properly, and only then commit the whole Air Force, because in his judgment, his young pilots were nowhere near experienced enough for this machine. He was told to let it go. His career never recovered. He was given unattractive postings, isolated, and was out of the Air Force by 1970. So there was money in Bonn. There were 916 aircraft. And there was the greatest fighter pilot who ever lived, on the record, saying this was going to end badly. All of it is true. And none of it explains the crashes. Because the money bought the aircraft. It did not fly the aircraft. To find out what was flying it, you have to go to a small airfield in North Rhine-Westphalia on the afternoon before a party. Norvenich, the 19th of June, 1962. Tomorrow there will be a ceremony to bring the Starfighter formally into a famous fighter-bomber wing, with the defense minister attending. Today, 4 aircraft are flying the dress rehearsal in tight formation. According to the German Air Force's own account, the American instructor leading them loses his orientation inside a cloud bank, leaves the formation, and dives. The 3 German pilots behind him are flying by eye, on him, and they follow him down into an open-cast coal pit. All 4 are killed. 2 of them were among the first 6 Germans ever trained on the type. The ceremony is canceled. Strauss delivers a eulogy instead, 3 days later. Germany banned military formation aerobatics after that crash, and the ban has never been lifted. That was the beginning. The peak came in 1965. 27 aircraft lost in 12 months. 17 pilots killed. On the 12th of January 1966, the inspector of the Luftwaffe, Lieutenant General Werner Panitsky, has to stand in front of the Parliamentary Defense Committee and report 26 crashes and 15 dead pilots for the previous year. 12 days later, the national press puts it on every newsstand in the country. In March, the parliament debates it on the floor, and the defense minister, Kai-Uwe von Hassel, tells the chamber that every air force in the world has to reckon with a certain loss rate, even in peacetime. Outside the chamber, the country has already written its own verdict. The Widowmaker, the Flying Coffin nail, and the joke that went around West Germany in those years, which tells you everything about how ordinary people felt. How do you get your own Starfighter? Buy a plot of land and wait. Now, if you want to know what was actually killing them, the investigation that followed produced 4 answers, and not one of them is a wing. The first answer is that they learned to fly it in the wrong sky. German conversion training was based at Luke Air Force Base outside Phoenix, Arizona, because Northern European weather made it impossible to do at home. Around 300 sunny days a year. Some 1,868 German pilots were trained there. Then they were posted from the Arizona desert into a North German winter, into low cloud and icing, to fly a low-level strike mission the aircraft had never been designed for. The syllabus they arrived with contained no bad weather training and no mountain flying training at all. The second answer is that they barely flew. In 1964, a Luftwaffe Starfighter pilot was averaging 9 hours a month in the aircraft. 9 hours, on the most demanding fighter in the world. The third answer is the ground. An engine mechanic named Manfred Scharf described it plainly. They lacked spare parts, so to make one aircraft serviceable, they routinely stripped others. And at first there were no hangars, so these high-technology machines stood out on the apron at the mercy of wind and weather. Damp was murder on the electrics. Switches failed, control units died, engines quit. The German Air Force was short something in the region of 10,000 trained mechanics. The fourth answer is the one that matters, and it is worth understanding exactly. That beautiful little T-tail could be blanked out by the wake of the wing at a high angle of attack. And when that happened, the nose pitched up on its own and the aircraft departed. The cure was 2 devices, a stick shaker to warn the pilot, and behind it, a kicker, which physically shoved the control stick forward harder than a man's arms could resist, whether he agreed or not. In evidence to Parliament, a Luftwaffe brigadier testified that this automatic pitch control had been malfunctioning since 1961, and that industry had never fixed it, which to this day, he said, has not been achieved. On the 6th of July, 1966, a committee inside the Luftwaffe command staff sat down and explicitly considered grounding the entire Starfighter fleet over that system. It voted against on the grounds that a long stand down would erode the pilot's currency. 2 days later, on the 8th of July, 1966, a signal went out ordering the kicker fork removed from every Starfighter in the Luftwaffe. Pilots were to be briefed specially that the kicker was now disabled, and that the shaker was the last mechanical warning they had. The order singled out one category of flying in particular for that warning: air-to-air and air-to-ground gunnery and intercept exercises. 10 days later, Oberleutnant Siegfried Arndt took off to fly an air-to-air gunnery exercise over the North Sea. You know how the aircraft ended. Now here is how the man ended. And every detail of it came out of that inquiry. He got out alive, in good weather, 2 miles from a destroyer. He spent 11 minutes under a good parachute doing everything he had been taught. He hit the water, the collar tore off, his head came out through it. The release would not open and the canopy dragged him under. He had received exactly 1 hour of theoretical survival instruction. 16 orange flying suits had been delivered to his wing, and when he transferred in that June, there was none left in his size. In a gray sea and an olive suit, he was almost invisible. The committee published two findings side by side. First, that the conditions for rescuing him were as favorable as could be imagined, followed immediately by the list of reasons he died anyway. Deficient sea survival equipment, deficient sea survival training, no coordinated search and rescue between the Air Force and the Navy, radio links to ships 2 miles away that failed or came too late, pilots and sailors who had never been trained to talk to each other, and water flooding a telephone cable duct at a naval station ashore. And second, on the aircraft itself, the committee found the removal order justified and then stated that it is beyond doubt that a functioning correction system would have corrected the stalled attitude in time and prevented the crash. Read that list again. Not one item on it is a wing or an engine or a design. Every single thing that killed Siegfried Arndt was a decision, and the biggest of them had been taken, in writing 10 days before he took off. Within 8 weeks, the man in charge of the German Air Force would say out loud what all of this added up to, and it would cost him his job. On the 12th of August, 1966, Werner Panitsky submitted his request for dismissal. On the 20th, he said in public what a serving inspector is not supposed to say, that the Starfighter purchase had been a purely political decision and therefore not one that could be justified in military terms. He was suspended on the 22nd and gone on the 25th of August, formally at his own request. The same day, the head of the entire German armed forces resigned as well. In one fortnight, the Federal Republic lost its Air Force chief, its defense chief, and any pretense that this was a story about metal. His replacement was Johannes Steinhoff, a wartime ace whose face had been rebuilt after he burned in a jet fighter in 1945, with another ace, Gunther Rahl, as his deputy. And Steinhoff and Rahl noticed something the German press had not. Every other Air Force flying this aircraft was losing far fewer of them. So instead of accepting either of the two easy answers on offer, that the aircraft was junk or that German pilots were careless, they went looking for what their own men were missing. And then they fixed it. They grounded the fleet. In March 1967, they contracted to tear out the Lockheed ejection seat, which was never a true zero-altitude seat, and replace it across the entire force with a British Martin Baker seat. Lockheed objected strenuously. They pushed through more than 2,000 design and safety modifications. They handed heavy maintenance to civilian contractors. They wrote bad weather and mountain flying into the syllabus. They drove pilot experience up from under 200 hours to 500, then 1,000. And they built hangars. Now look at what is not on that list. Nobody redesigned the wing. Nobody replaced the engine. Nobody made the leading edge blunter or the tail bigger. Here is what happened. Reported at the time, West Germany was writing off starfighters at a rate of 83.6 per 100,000 flying hours in 1965. By 1969, the figure was 10.8. The international norm in those years was somewhere between 15 and 20. Germany went from more than 4 times the world's accident rate to comfortably better than it. Counted in men instead, straight off the roll of honor, 17 killed in 1965, 13 in 1966, 3 in 1967. It never again came near the crisis years, and the aircraft that was flying in 1969 was the same aircraft that had been flying in 1965. Now, before the verdict, the hard part. Because if I tell you this was a gentle machine, you will stop believing me, and you should. It was not gentle. In American hands, flown by career pilots, in good weather, in small numbers, it had the worst serious accident rate of any of the Century Series fighters, around 26.7 per 100,000 hours, against 16.25 for the F-114.2 for the F-102. And an academic study of 71 German accident files from long after the reforms concluded that this type genuinely was more accident-prone than its contemporaries, that its unforgiving handling produced an elevated rate of pilot error, and that more than half of those accidents were engine-related. So the defense is not that the Starfighter was safe. The defense is that it was exactly this demanding everywhere, and only lethal on this scale in one place. And everywhere else, it did the job it was built for. On the opening morning of the war between India and Pakistan, in September 1965, a Pakistani flight lieutenant named Aftab Alam Khan dived on 4 Indian fighters, scattered them, came back around at low level, and fired a Sidewinder. In his words, he squeezed the trigger and kept it pressed, and the flash of the missile blinded him for a few seconds. The first air-to-air kill by a starfighter anywhere in the world. Italy built its own under license and flew the Starfighter for 41 years and just under 1 million flight hours. The last 24-hour alert shift ever stood by an F-104 ended at 08:25 in the morning on the 31st of October, 2004. A Luftwaffe pilot named Peter Wamser, who logged over 3,250 hours in the thing, put it about as fairly as anyone ever has. It was demanding, he said, but it was a beautiful aircraft to fly. If you have stayed with me this far, the last few minutes are the reason I made this film. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe and I will keep digging them up. Because there is one more document, and it changes the color of everything you have just heard. On the 30th of September 1975, a senior American State Department official wrote a memorandum marked secret, eyes only, summarizing what Senate investigators had turned up about Lockheed in Western Europe. It says that during the early 60s, Lockheed paid bribes to Franz Josef Strauss, his wife and his party, and then it says this: every time the West Germans became nervous about the costs of the Starfighter, and then its flight worthiness, Lockheed poured more money into German hands. Read the second half of that sentence again. Flight worthiness, not the price, not the contract, the question of whether the aircraft was safe. And the memorandum's own conclusion is a shrug. I frankly do not believe, the writer says, that there is anything useful we can do at this point. 8 days later, on the 8th of October, 1975, in the Oval Office, the Secretary of State raised it with the President. Kissinger called it a potentially embarrassing problem. Bribes to Prince Bernhard and to Strauss from Lockheed. We must do everything possible, he said, to keep this quiet, because if the party is destroyed in Germany, it will really shake the country and strengthen the left. Ford asked how much was involved. It runs into millions, Kissinger told him. It involved the F-104. In that same year, in that same country, more than 30 German widows settled with Lockheed for about 3 million marks, roughly 40,000 marks a family. Lockheed admitted no liability. Neither room ever knew about the other. So now you have the money and you have the deaths, and here is the verdict, because they are not the same story. The money is a motive without a mechanism. No bribe removed the kicker from 100 aircraft. No bribe took the orange flying suit out of Siegfried Arndt's size, or limited him to 1 hour of survival training, or left the ejection seat unable to save a man at low level. No bribe left fighters standing out in the rain because the hangars had not been built, or sent young men from Arizona sunshine into North German cloud with 9 hours a month in their logbooks, or voted on the 6th of July, 1966, not to ground the fleet because a stand-down would look bad. Every one of those was a decision taken by people who could have decided otherwise. And we know that for certain because in 1966, 2 men did decide otherwise, and the dying very largely stopped without one single change to the aircraft. The procurement files were destroyed in 1962. The bribery findings were buried in 1975. What survives, still readable in a parliamentary archive 60 years later, is a document about 11 minutes in the North Sea. And what it names as the cause of death is not a wing 4 inches thick, or an engine or a leading edge you could cut your hand on. It names a decision taken 10 days earlier because grounding the fleet was politically unaffordable. Siegfried Arndt went into the water at 13:29 on the 18th of July, 1966, and he was dead by about 20 minutes to 2, and his body came ashore 27 days later. He was one of 116. The press gave the machine a name, and the name stuck for 60 years because a name is easier to carry than a list of committee minutes. And at Torrejon today, there is a Starfighter parked in the sun. Serial 63-13643. It flew for Spain for 7 years in 676 hours without an accident, then for Greece for 20 more, and landed for the last time at 11:42 in the morning on the 20th of May, 1992. The Spaniards brought it home in 2017. It is the same mark of aircraft that Siegfried Arndt fell out of, the same wing you could cut your hand on, the same engine. In one country, it is a monument. In another, it is a gravestone with 116 names on it. So, if the machine did it, why did it only do it here? It didn't. The aircraft did exactly the same thing in every sky it was ever flown in. It was fast, it was beautiful, and it was completely unforgiving, and it asked the same price of every Air Force that ever bought it. Spain paid that price in hangars, in good weather, and in a simple job. Italy paid it over 41 years. West Germany, in a hurry, in the dark, in the rain, with a nuclear alert to stand and 9 flying hours a month, decided it could not afford the price. So it paid in men instead. That is what the Widowmaker really was. Not a design flaw, a bill that came due on 116 kitchen tables.